Okay, so we have a lot of props today, my friends. We may not use all of them today, but I kind of wanted to give you an idea of the objects that we'll be using in this Monday mobility snack and maybe even some of our other classes. So just so you can have them available to you, some sort of a seat. It could be a bench, a chair, yoga block, of course, and then a foam roller that's a little shorter. So I think this is pretty typical for home foam rollers. Some of the ones we have at the gym are like super tall, so that's why I said shorter, but it doesn't have to be super short. A dowel or a broomstick, which I think most of you already have. And later on in the month, we're going to be adding resistance to this work, so that will mean a stretchy resistance band. It could be a loop one, but I think it would be better for the stuff that we're going to be doing. We don't need that today, but we want the loose ribbon one. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Axel's ready. Yes. Okay, cool. So during the class, for those of you that are live, feel free to chime in if you have any questions. I think most of you, all of you have done this stuff before. Today when I taught some of this work in my earlier classes, I was struck by how many different things, how many different movements and base positions that we can use to explore the vehicle of internal rotation. So I'm super excited about this month. Because even though we'll still be doing a lot of our traditional yoga and mobility stuff, I'm excited to try some new things. So enough yammering. We're going to actually sit in our chair or on our low bench and have your foam roller handy. So you're just going to sit like you would sit if you were at your dinner table. And just have your foam roller nearby. And you can just like set it on your lap or whatever you want to do with it. Set it on its end. And we'll just start with some conscious breathing. Inhaling and exhaling out of the nostrils. I'm going to face you so that you have a little bit better view of my hips. Let your shoulders drop. Try to feel for that full body expansion in a lateral breath movement. Belly can move if it wants. I'm just trying to keep the shoulders pretty chill. And then we're going to set up the foam roller in between the legs. And I should have mentioned, if you don't have a foam roller, a block could work. But the reason why I like this is you can get the bottom edge of your roller in between your legs, and then you can hold the top side so it stays real stable. So you're going to actually squeeze into that foam roller if you have one. And then just a tiny little bit, you're going to float your right foot off the ground. And still try to keep your pelvis nice and level. And then visualize an X on the very top side of your thigh. And you're going to try to turn that X towards the foam roller. So your heel might pivot outward. And this might be a tiny, tiny degree of movement. So it might just be like barely past vertical. And then return to that neutral hip position and just set your foot down. Take another breath in and out. And let's try that again. Just barely float your right leg off the ground. And then find that internal spiral of your hip, just a few degrees. If you feel a cramp coming on, that's perfectly normal. Just back off, but try to stay in the stretch. Release back to neutral, set it down, take another breath. And now we're going to use a little bit of core pressure to see if we can make a few more degrees of motion. So as you inhale, you're going to find that internal rotation and hold the breath for a moment or two. Exhale slowly. As you inhale again, try to find a few more degrees of rotation inward. Hold your breath for a moment with full lungs. Exhale, hold the stretch. One more inhale fully and hold it, and see if you can eke out 1 or 2 more degrees of internal rotation. Hold your breath momentarily. And then as you exhale, return to neutral. And then you can just set that foam roller down, take a moment, and breathe. And let's start again. The idea here is to introduce depth in small increments. So we're going to start with minimal movement and then gradually progress to a little bit more range. Just a sliver. Lift your left foot off the ground. You can hold on to your foam roller so you're getting a little bit of front chest and shoulder activation. And then spiral the top side of your thigh inward towards that foam roller and try not to let it twist. So you're just going to hold it securely vertical. Another in and out breath. Pelvis is staying level. Return to neutral, set your foot down. Let's try again, just a little tiny float. Pivot, thigh bone turns in, heel spirals out. Trying to keep that foam roller vertical even though it's going to want to pivot to the right side. Return to neutral, rest. Notice if your torso is leaning back. I just caught myself leaning back a little bit. Not a big deal. Okay, let's do the last one. Remember, we're going to use the pressure to our advantage. So when we create pressure in the trunk, that's a stabilization effect. Oftentimes that'll give us a little bit more range of motion in our distal limbs. So strong inhale breath, fill up, find your rotation and hold the breath just for a moment or two. Keep the position, exhale your breath. Stamp down with your right leg. Inhale fully and hold. Try to get a few more degrees of motion in that left hip. Keep the position. Exhale slow. One more. Really full, really big breath. Expand. Hold the breath. Try to get a few more degrees of motion and internal rotation. And then as you exhale, you're going to let it go. And set your prop off to the side and just sit in your chair for a moment. Notice what you're feeling in the hips, in the back, in the front, on the sides, all around. Okay, so we won't need the chair in our next position. You may want a blanket or even a block to shim one of your hips. So set your chair off to the side. The other thing we could use, if we wanted to help generate even more trunk stability in this, and I haven't really tried this in a seamless way, but the dowel, you could keep it handy just in case, because we might be able to use that. So you're going to be on your seat. And let's spin the right leg out in front. That's going to be our pinwheel base. So I'm going to show you from this view, but you arrange yourself however you want. We're going to try to make 90-degree angles with the hip and the knee. Sometimes we call this 90-90 pose. Now your tendency will be to bring your heels close to your body. You're going to try to bring your heels away from your body as much as your body will allow, so that potentially your knees are open to 90 degrees. The other thing that we're watching for is this left hip. Your knee probably wants to be a little closer to that front leg. But I like to try to encourage you to send the knee backwards so that it's coming straight out from your hip at a 90-degree angle. Now, how I could see the dowel being used is to take it in your right hand and press into the ground to help keep you more upright. That's an option. It's also fine just to keep your right hand beside you for a little base of support. So just a quick anatomy brush up. This front hip is rotating outward. It's also in a position of mild abduction. And then this left hip is already in internal rotation. And we're just going to try to develop a little bit more intensity in this situation. First things first, let's take a nice little passive stretch. Lean forward over your front leg any amount. If leaning straight forward makes your right hip a little congested, you could take your trunk off to the side on a diagonal, more towards like the knee or the corner of your mat. Now, as you allow your muscles in the front leg to relax, let's give the left glutes a squeeze. So this hip is already in a little bit of extension, and we're just kind of supporting that work by squeezing the glutes. Now relax off that contraction and press your front leg a little closer to the floor, including the back outside edge of the knee. Keep that effort of pressing the front leg into the floor, and once again squeeze your back leg glutes. Now relax. One last time, press down the front leg, squeeze the left leg hip, glutes. And then you're going to bring your torso upright as much as possible. So you might still feel inclined to lean away from your left leg. If it feels a little crowded, you can do that. You could just kind of lean over to the right. But if you can sit up tall, we're going to try that. And then we're going to spiral left with the upper torso. So we're turning our sternum towards the left knee or the left toes with a straight back if possible. And by straight, I mean just your neutral upright position. And then think of getting a little heavier in your inner left knee and maybe just a little bit lighter in the foot, even though it's not going to go anywhere. And then you're going to square up back to the front of your mat or slightly turn towards your right if that's better for you. If you feel like you need to lean forward to do this, you're going to. You're either going to use a rolled up blanket, a dowel, or a block underneath your left heel or underneath your left ankle. So now you're creating even more hip internal rotation. So your knee is going to stay down. And you're going to try to increase the amount of rotation in that left hip. You could even use like a small weight or something, just any object that will bring your foot off the ground a little ways. And once again, this is just a nice passive stretch. We're relaxing into the position for a few breaths. Now, when we get into the active work, you may want to lose the object under your foot because it's going to make things even more challenging for you. So if this is already feeling kind of icky and congested, you're going to remove that object. If it's feeling okay, you're just going to lean forward slightly again and try to lift your foot off of the floor or off of your object as you keep your knee grounded. And then relax and place your foot back down. Soften the glutes. You might earn a little hip cramp. Once again, let's try to spiral the left thigh bone, visualizing that X again turning towards your yoga mat as your heel pivots off the ground. Let's double check and make sure your pelvis and chest are still facing mostly forward. Now relax back down with that left leg. Just give it a moment. Double check your position. We want the knee straight out from the hip rather than forward towards that front heel. Let's do one more lift off. Lean forward, try to turn your leg towards your mat as your ankle floats. See how it feels to inhale really full and then hold your breath and see if you can go a little higher with that leg, with your lungs full. Exhale, let everything go. And then lean back slightly. Let's go ahead and take some of the weight off that left hip. So you're going to bring your left hand or right hand beside you. Open up that left hip now and just set your foot on the ground. And you can just kind of wiggle it back and forth, in and out. And then let's switch the base. Bring your left leg to be the lead leg and your right leg to be the trailing leg. Setting up that pinwheel-like shape with straight angles. Shins and thighs are perpendicular from one another. You could use the dowel to press into the floor if you wanted to create a little more stability. I'm just going to relax into the stretch for now. We don't have anything under the foot yet. We're going to save that for the progression. Full but relaxed breathing. Let's lean in a little bit over that front leg. Now we're going to add in the glute contractions. So you're still going to stay in this forward hinge. Press down with your front leg to anchor, and then just give your right bum a squeeze. That might drive your pelvis slightly forward. That's okay. Now relax the glutes on the right side. Relax the downward pressure of the front leg. Press down again. The whole outer seam of this left leg is rooting to the floor, and then we're just squeezing the right side glutes. Relax off of that. We'll try it one more time. Press down. Right knee is super heavy, pressing into the floor, and squeeze the right bum. And then as you come back up to the upright position, use as much of this left hand to support you as you need to, especially if you feel like you're really in a side stretch. So in that case, we'll just want to work that left arm out even more so that your spine can be a little bit more neutral. But now we're going to turn towards the trailing leg in the upper torso. Keeping a strong connection to the downward pressure from your inner right knee. Let's just imagine that the foot's a little lighter, even though it's not going to lift at all here. Maybe it's just a little bit of a mind connection. Two more breaths. And then we're going to go ahead and prop up the inside of the right foot or ankle with some sort of an object. The higher it is, the more intense it will be for that hip rotation. So just try to ease into it. It might be just a few inches. It might be up to 4 to 5 inches. See if you can think about drawing your right rib cage to the right and pulling the left ribs towards the right as well. If that's not possible, lean away from your right leg towards the left. Now we're in a new passive range. We're just going to relax here for a few breaths before we try to do those little lift-offs. If this new range is feeling pretty resistant and you don't think you'd be able to lift your foot off the object, just take it away and then keep your knee where it is and try to roll your thigh in just enough to float your back leg foot. Now relax, set everything down. And then we'll try again. Float it. Think of turning that X that's on the top of your thigh towards the floor. The ankle might want to do all sorts of crazy things too. You're just going to try to keep your ankle pretty straight and neutral. Relax. Now in this final repetition, we're going to see how or if we notice any changes if we try to get a really full breath in the abdomen and then hold it. As you're holding your breath, see if there's any more rotation possible. Let's go. Inhale, lift, pivot. Maybe take one more sip of air and hold that breath. Try for a few more degrees of rotation. And exhale, let it go. Now you're going to open the right hip. Stamp your foot down on the ground. And with or without the support of your hand or arm, you're just going to let that leg roll in and roll out. As the hip moves, the pelvis, let's try to keep it still. Okay, we just have 2 more base positions, and then we're going to be done for today because I don't want to throw too much at you, and that was a lot. So, tabletop position. Very familiar. Knees under the hips, more or less. Wrists can be ahead of the shoulders if they like a little less extension, or directly under is also fine too. So you're going to keep your right shin to the ground, and you're going to keep your left knee to the ground, but you're going to pick up your left shin and foot. So it's like you're squeezing a ball behind that left knee. And we're going for hip internal rotation, followed by hip external rotation. So the inward rotation, the toes start to move away from you. Top of the thigh rolls towards the opposite thigh. And then the external rotation, the toes are going to start to creep more inward towards the back of your right leg. And the top of the thigh turns outward. Let's go really slow on this and do a few more. You're working towards a level pelvis and spine. So what I notice in my body is when I do the internal rotation and my foot starts to turn out, my left hip and shoulder want to pull closer together into a lateral side stretch. So in that case, we just do a little less rotation so that we can keep everything else right where it was in that tabletop. We've got 3 more repetitions. Keep the knee as closed as it'll go with your hamstrings flexing, contracting. Might be just starting to get into a little fatigue in the chest and shoulders, especially if you're really going for that strong, stable push. Don't forget to push into those base knuckles to ease the wrists. Last one or so. I always lose count. And then for a little break, you could either take a down dog. You could just sit back on your heels and offload the wrists, or maybe even a child's pose, if that appeals to you. Just regroup with some nice intentional breathing. All right, second round in the tabletop. I'm going to use my block here for a little feedback for a neutral pelvis. I'm just going to balance it there on my sacrum. And if I feel the block moving around a lot, that's going to tell me that my movement is coupled with pelvic movement. So now your left shin's going to stay planted and pushing along with your arms. Try to keep your knees pretty even. And that right knee is going to stay down. And then let's find those rotations. Nice and slow. Rolling the top of the thigh towards your left. That's the internal. And then rolling the top of your thigh towards the right. Toes are going to crisscross behind you. That's the external. Just testing the edges here. Find a really strong shoulder position. You can also think about your shoulder blades drawing apart into protraction. Just a slight tuck of the chin, but try not to let your head droop. My friend Mark calls that head drooping position the Pez dispenser head. Not so great. Think of a light shining at the top of your head, straight forward with a beam. Let's do 3 to 4 more. And then we'll take another reset. Same choices as before, or you could do a standing forward bend, just to see how that feels. And in the case of a down dog or a standing forward bend, you're just going to think about the effort of hip internal rotation. Now the position is neutral, but it's like you're trying to roll your thigh bones in towards each other slightly. And that's true in both down dog and forward bend. Then it doesn't matter what position you're in, you're just gonna transition yourself in your most efficient way to standing. And then we're gonna need that foam roller again. And you're gonna need your wall. The foam roller is going to be pressing against the wall like this, and then you're going to arrange your right outer hip against the foam roller like this. So you're using that as a wedge between you and the wall. It's on your right hip. It's horizontal, straight out from the hip joint, more or less. So like that greater trochanter area, that's where we want the foam roller to be centered on. Stand on your left leg. You're going to bring your right knee directly in front of your hip. Again, we've got that 90 degrees of flexion, just like we did in the 90-90 base. We're going to return to hip internal rotation. The X on the top of your thigh is rolling inward, and your heel is going to pivot outward. Now this one we're just going to hold. And we're going to think of a little bit of pressure into the foam roller, and then a little more spiral in the thigh. Just take a peek down at your knee. Has it drifted inward? Has it drifted outward? And can we keep it directly in front of the hip? Breathing for 10. 9. Really squeeze the left bum, stand up tall. 7. 6. 5. Think of shining the bottom of your foot, the sole of your foot, into the wall. Last 3. 2, and 1. Relax. Give your foam roller a hug and just let the hips shimmy. I'm gonna try this time to use my dowel as a point of support. Move on to the left side now. Squeeze the foam roller against the wall and against your hip. I'm getting a little bit of good work here on both hips really in this position, because now our right leg has to stabilize us. So you're going to think of centering your heel under your sitting bone. Dowel, probably want it to be in the right hand, so you're going to just drive it down into the ground. Flex your hip and knee to 90, and then spiral. The knee We want it directly ahead of the hip rather than drifting in and drifting out. You can use that left hand to also push against the wall. And we're here for 10, 9, 8, a little more, 7. You can play around with breath pressure. Last 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Oh my goodness, let it go. Foam roller on the floor because we're going to use it just for a little bit of rolling and recovery. And we're going to be rolling the TFL, which is that funky little muscle where your front pocket is. So if you take your fingertip to your big protrusion on your greater trochanter and then the top rim of your pelvis, it's right in the middle there on a diagonal line. It's a little awkward to get into this. So I'm going to start on my right side on my tummy, turning my right hip a little bit inward to get the pressure point on my TFL. I like to come to my forearms just so I have a little less spine extension. My left leg feels like a little frog pose off to the side, so it's bending. And I'm just going to push with my right toes and just find a little front to back roll. So you're kind of on your right side, but not completely. Your pelvis is tipped sideways slightly. Now find a spot in that small little pocket area. Bend your knee on that right leg, and now make some teeny tiny rotations in the hip, angling it inward and angling it outward. Pelvis might want to wiggle too. You're just going to try to keep it set. You might feel that TFL muscle pushing into your foam roller when you turn your hip in. That's because it's contracting. Now let's switch sides. A little bit of therapeutic rolling. Kickstand the right leg for support. You can think of a little tuck under with your tailbone to give your lumbar spine a little more support and length. So there's a little front body contraction. Slight cat pose maybe. Pushing on those left toes. Have a lot less sensation in this hip, which is interesting. I thought it was going to be the other way around today. Pause the rolling on a spot that you can really kind of feel that there's something happening there. I might have to turn a little more to get a little more sensation. And then bend your knee. Try to find that little tiny spiral. Roll the thigh in and out. When you roll the thigh out, the outside edge of your knee will get a little closer to your mat. Okay, that's all I have for you today, my friends. I think you've all been practicing with me enough, and we've done enough hip rotation stuff that you probably won't have too much delayed onset muscle soreness, the DOMS, but some of this work was real focused, so it could be that you're a little sore today, tomorrow, or the next day. Hopefully it won't be too uncomfortable, but more of just a reminder that you did some really good work today. Let me turn my music off here. Welcome to answer any questions that you might have about anything before you head out for the day. Just let me know.
It's amazing how different each side was. Like I couldn't even lift one side.
Yeah.
When we had the leg down and we were trying to lift. Wow.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And I think that's fairly common just because of the way our pelvis is. Our pelvis isn't one piece, it's two halves. And just because of the way we adapt and the way we sit and the way we drive and the way we get out of our vehicles and stuff like that, one side is usually tipped slightly forward and the other side is tipped slightly backward. So that's going to limit. I'm curious to know, though, which leg you had a harder time rotating and lifting.
The right one.
The right one was a little trickier?
The right one. left-handed.
Yeah. So for me, my left hip doesn't do as well. So if I'm in this position, this is a little harder. So mine's just the opposite, but I sit like this a lot. So my right hip is already rotating a lot inward.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's what it is. You know, maybe you sit more like this sometimes, like if you're just like casually sitting down, or maybe it's the way you cross your legs this way. I don't know. It could just be your body too. It could just be hardwired in your structure. But most of our, I would say overall movement anatomy is because of the way we've adapted, not necessarily it's the way the bones go into each other. So some people say, well, my hip just doesn't do that because of the way my hips are. And I would say in 99% of the cases, that's not true. It's soft tissue adaptation that limits our ranges. And hardly anybody does this stuff. You don't see it in any sport. You don't see it, well, you do see it in sports, but you don't see people training it. But if you think about like a batter, you know, when they're, or even a golfer, there is hip rotation. And if they don't train that, then the next thing up is right here. So if we don't have hip rotation, then the spine has to rotate more. So that's where we get into like some crunchy stuff in the low back. Yeah. Anybody else?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's gonna be a good month.
Yeah, I'm excited. This is my favorite stuff.
See you, Sarah.
See ya. See ya, Chris. Thank you. Bye, Jenny.
Bye.
Take care. Okay, I can stop the Facebook feed now. I wanted to keep you in on the, yikes. Yeah, I hear you. I wanted to keep you all in on the discussion. Great to see everybody. See you next time. Drop any questions into the comments, please.